Good evening, everyone. It is good to be with you this evening. I am Patrick Krisak, the Director of Faith Formation and Missionary Discipleship for the Archdiocese of Boston. I see we have many familiar faces who've been on these and at things with us before, and some new folks. And thank you very much for joining us. We have our team here with us tonight, Rosemary Maffey and Melissa Kalpasian, you probably know. But we have one new face on our team, Jared Cowell, who joined us as an evangelization consultant on December 19th. Katie Gray is the Director of Parish and Diocesan Relationships at LifeTeen. She was for many years a parish coordinator of youth ministry and has served LifeTeen in this and some other capacities for a number of years as well. We've had the pleasure of getting to know Katie as the MC of LifeTeen's Catholic Youth Ministry Convention, which some of us attended in Phoenix in June, and she was with us in November doing some workshops on the relationship between confirmation and youth ministry, and Purpose, which is LifeTeen's confirmation preparation program. And tonight she'll be speaking to us about generational differences between Gen Alpha, Gen Z, and I'm sure she'll have more to say besides that. And with that, I'll pass it over to Katie.
Well, thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you on our Wednesday evening. Really excited to be with you. I was telling the team that my children have been cooped up with the conjunction of snow days on top of winter break. And so my house is a circus. And sometimes it's nice to just sit in the office where there's a Blessed Sacrament chapel right next to you. You just feel the peace and serenity. So grateful to spend the time with you all. Coming to you from St. Louis, where it is a whopping 4 degrees. So I hope whatever you are experiencing in your world is slightly warmer, or that you have booked a trip south, like many of us have the temptation to do in these months of cold. I'm going to talk to you today about middle school and high school kind of developmental differences. A lot of the research that we do is a propellant for how we start thinking through like the content to create, how we engage teenagers at our camps and our conferences, and just a lot of our training methodology around connecting and reaching teens so that when we share the gospel with them, that they're receptive and excited to hear what the Lord has in store for their life. So I'm going to pray with us, and then just excited to jump in with you all tonight. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. God, you are good and you are kind and you are generous to us. And in the quiet, generous moments today, Lord, where you poured into our lives and our ministries, the ones we saw and the ones we missed, Lord, we are just so grateful. Thanks for calling us into this ministry. Whatever it looks like right now, Lord, we are really grateful that you have asked us to witness your love to the students that we get to care for. And we pray, Lord, that we will continuously be open to your Holy Spirit and the ways in which you are inviting and asking us to serve in maybe bigger and bolder ways this coming year. Please bless our efforts abundantly, Lord, not for our glory, but always for yours. We pray this in your name. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Okay, real quick, just some rhetorical questions because I know we're on Zoom, but I want you to think back to the seasons of middle school and high school if you can get there. I seem to have pushed a lot of middle school out, I think, as I've reflected on that over the years. But when I think about high school, I feel like I have a lot of memories that are still sitting there. And it made me think about what it's like to be a student nowadays. So for example, would you rather have forgotten, these are kind of would you rathers. Would you rather have forgotten your locker combination on the first day of school? Or would you have rather forgotten to have that you had a test that day? And some people were like, I fly by the seat of my pants. I could have taken some test. Would you rather have sat alone at lunch, or would you rather have had to sing a solo in a choir in front of the whole school? I'm just trying to think about some of the things that our kids might be feeling or thinking or doing in their school days. Would you rather get picked last? This is a middle school question. Would you rather get picked last for dodgeball or be seen picking your nose? Ooh, that one's hard when you're a middle schooler, right? There's just a lot of feelings you're going through in that season. Would you rather have had a bad outfit or a bad haircut on picture day? That one might still be sitting with some of our friends. There's just an experience we have in those middle school days that have hung out with us. It's funny because I have a middle schooler right now. And actually, prior to this call, we were talking about like going and visiting high schools, which is the shadow stuff they do in seventh and eighth grade. And it made me think my seventh grader and my 4-year-old are both a part of Gen Alpha. And the differentiation in the world of that, although there's some similarities between a 4-year-old and a 13-year-old in terms of like hormones and emotions, it's just wild. And so when we think about serving a middle schooler and maybe a sixth grader, sixth grade boy, and serving a senior in high school girl, the differences in maturity and in development are all really important in how we create a space for encounter to preach the gospel. And so I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. And I want to jump in. Here's my keynote. Let me open this up. All right, y'all can see this, right? We could see this. We could see this fun. Let's do this. We're gonna talk about iPhones and hormones. Not really, but that's kind of like the thought process around what's happening in the world of a middle schooler and a high schooler. I would say those two things are often involved. Shall we say that? But I want to talk about some of the differences that we have really noted, and then we'll talk about some applications for how that plays into ministry. So I'm going to do 2 different acronyms. Tonight, we're going to talk about eager and bright. We're going to talk about how middle schoolers are eager and high schoolers are bright. And that doesn't mean that middle schoolers are not bright and high schoolers are not eager. But for the sake of this argument, I needed to pick a word. So this is where we went, my friends. And I also want to tee this up by, at the end of the day, yes, these are a lot of the developmental things we are seeing. You may recognize that there are some things that are like, well, not really. My high school students seem to be, more like this. Totally get it. But this is kind of where we've been as we've done a lot of the studies and work through a lot of what's going on in the world today with these middle schoolers and high schoolers. So some of it can translate to different generations, but just good to keep in mind a little bit of what we've got going on inside of our youth ministry programs. So when we think about the middle schoolers that we get a chance to see, we talk about emerging, affirmation seeking, growing, emotionally expanding, and being relational. And so I'm going to kind of pop into each of these a little bit. I didn't put all these bullets on here, so I'm happy to share my notes that I wrote up. I can actually like formalize them and share them with you after our presentation this evening. So when we think about someone who's emerging in these middle school years, we think about a little bit how there's a little bit more curiosity. They might be a little bit more argumentative. Maybe they're growing into some arguments that they weren't usually doing in the younger grades. They have that short attention span. Maybe you've heard that statistic that like a middle schooler, a teenager, they have that attention span that's like 8.6 seconds. And we always laugh because supposedly, I guess, I don't know how you do this, a goldfish's attention span is 9 seconds. So like we're getting the understanding that these kids have a very short attention span. If you think about social media, it essentially has pivoted to that world of reels, like these very fast-paced videos, because the attention span that those who are consuming it is diminishing. You know what I mean? Like there's just that reality around, oh, I don't want to sit and watch a 3-minute video. If we sit down to watch a 3-minute video, sometimes it takes us a whole lot of time to really get into it. But when you're a middle schooler, you are almost deciding quickly if something is worth stopping. So you might be able to scroll really quickly, but you're really deciding quickly, is this worth it? So that attention span plays into how we execute a lot inside of our youth nights, and I'll talk more about that later. Testing parental boundaries, that should come as no surprise. There's a little bit idea around what is authority and who is authority and who isn't. And that may be something that is becoming something that someone might wrestle with in terms of like the authority of the church. So here we are teaching the truth of our church, and they might be at that place where they're wrestling with the idea of what authority has over them in terms of whether it's teachers or parents or rules or obligations or expectations. We think about the idea around how they're developing that metacognition, about that ability to be able to say like, you don't know what you don't know yet, guys, but they don't know what they don't know yet. And so you're trying to meet them where they are without feeling like, yeah, but you definitely don't know that yet because you're still developing that frontal lobe, which many people are high school and up to 25. But that concept around abstract thinking is pretty big for some of our middle schoolers. And so we want to think as they're emerging, how are we keeping things possibly a little more black and white as they're kind of getting into that world of not being able to develop that abstract thinking just yet. They are, as we know, in middle school years, a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit naive, opinionated in terms of like they might say like I'm very one-sided in terms of this is it. That goes with that black and white idea of there is no gray area. It's either this is truth or that is truth. And sometimes that argumentative side means it's harder to see the truth is actually truth because they only see one version of it. Like it's presented like this on social media or it's presented like this here. And so that's how I've consumed it. And I've seen that to be the truth. So they may ask more large, unanswerable questions. You know, maybe it's a little bit more about the meaning of life. And I don't think they expect absolute answers necessarily. But the thing is that they are going to start wondering more things and wrestling with more questions and wanting to learn more about the world around them. And we may not have every answer, or we might not be able to explain it in a way that they're receptive to. And that's why I really believe conversations inside of our ministries are just so vital so that kids know that even if we don't have all the answers, that we're still seeking that and that we're, whether we're going to even go ask our pastor for help or whatever that is, but that we are willing to hear their questions. You know, sometimes when we think about middle schoolers and it's like they might have a lot of questions to ask, and sometimes it's easy to be like, guys, just give me a minute, just figure it out. And you're like, no, we want to be able to give the space so that they will ask and ask and ask the questions. Okay, so affirmation seeking Andy. Also, I don't know any of these people, but I really liked the alliteration piece of it, so I added that. So you may be like, I don't know anyone who's a Gen Alpha named Andy, but maybe there's someone else somewhere else. So we think about how there's that desire for supportive adults who express love, acceptance, and care for them. Obviously, that goes hand in hand with needing to make sure we're maintaining rules and expectations. But there is that desire of wanting to feel connected and sometimes not knowing how to do that, even in their own skin, especially as we'll talk about growing Gabe in a second. But they need to be affirmed, whether that is their love language or not, that they have these supportive, caring adults, i.e. you all, their parents, hopefully, that are expressing love and acceptance while maintaining those rules, expectations, and boundaries for them. They might be inconsistent in behavior. We might learn that about our middle schoolers, more self-conscious because they're trying to figure out and navigate how to fit in, judging themselves sometimes more harshly. I had to say to my middle schooler recently, like, hey, you know what? It's okay to be gentle on yourself. It's okay to not just rip yourself apart for something small. But sometimes it's hard for them to let go of something because socially it's such a big part of it too. So we want to make sure they're not persistently judging themselves on all the things, but we want to be affirming in all of the good they're doing and growing in their middle school years, especially those moments where they're taking those leaps of faith and talking about how Jesus matters to them. And they want to make personal choices, but they're trying to figure out what their family expects of them or what the values are being asked of them, whether that's from family or what the church is asking and telling them to do. And so just trying to figure out in their decision making how they make some of those choices and stretch that a little bit more in those years. I think about our growing Gabe. It's my daughter just went on a retreat, and they were all these little 7th grade girls are like talking about like who's the cutest teen leader, blah blah. And they're like, it's Gabe, and my daughter goes, that's my cousin. Like I can't. I was like, that's a compliment, Gianna. It's good to know. So we think about growing Gabe. And so just those, I mentioned my 4-year-old and my 13-year-old, and the reality that those are 2 very significant periods of physical development for human life. So I'm also kind of seeing while they're very different, I'm like, wow, this is the same child, only this child just like covers herself up and this kid slams the door. But that idea around they're developing and there's elements about them growing that is a little bit out of their control. We were joking about just the sixth graders I know, and they were talking about how they played a basketball team, and the team I was talking with, the parents are like super rec league, but they're like, no, we played these other kids in 6th grade, and like 2 or 3 kids had like these full grown mustaches, and they like didn't know what to do about it because it was like, oh my gosh. but there's just the dramatic growth that happens and can make them feel awkward or clumsy, uncomfortable, restless, even. Those are elements that will play into how we are when we're giving a proclaim teaching, keeping in mind where are these kids sitting, how are they sitting, how long are they sitting. Those things play into that, and they're so self-conscious about who's around them and what's being said or what's being heard or how much people are paying attention. All those things about in their growth. And just remembering too that frequent hormonal imbalance can make middle school youth feel like, oh my gosh, I need to eat. I'm more excited and more energetic. I'm more emotional. Maybe I'm more tired. And so just keeping those things in mind, that like there's elements about their behavior inside of our time with us that may really actually be applicable to what's actually happening with all the growth inside of them. Emotionally expansive Eddie, giving him a lot of credit. He's grown in all of his emotions. But we think about how they might be more sensitive to criticism, or if some kid says a joke inside of it, just being aware that those emotions can be a lot bigger. They could be easily offended in those kind of conversations. So we might not necessarily just out of the blue kind of make a joke or something at a large group toward a middle schooler if we don't believe that they would be easy to play that off. A high schooler that you're a little bit more in relationship with, who has a different maturity, might be able to take a joke, but it all kind of depends on the setting, the environment, and the kid. And often believe that middle schoolers might find that they think these problems they're experiencing are unique to them and who they are. They might think that like adults can't understand, like you would never get this, or this is different than when you were young, which could be all valid points, but just the reality that they don't necessarily know that their problems could be solvable or relatable to other people, especially of other generations. Um, they are a little bit more of a hopeful group, though. Like there's layers of things that they haven't necessarily maybe experienced, maybe as much heartache as some of our older high school kids, depending on what they've been exposed to. But they're a little bit more essentially like optimistic at their heart and a little bit more playful. And that they are really just trying to figure out who they are as individuals and how does this matter to me? What does this make for my life? How does this change me? And so there is a lot of that understanding of like, as you're talking about the truth of the gospel, or you're talking about an aspect of the faith, like how are we helping them personalize that so they understand, while it is for everyone, well, how does it matter to them? And then relational Rachel, relational, extroverted, whatever term you want to tell, but craving some of that social interaction. The idea that their friends are oxygen. There is something to be said about their peers or the interactions they get to have socially. Even the most introverted kids desire that ability to be around friends and have community and belong, which is really what we're all seeking too. They can be fiercely loyal to their friend group, even in the moments where they can be inconsiderate or have conflict or tension with other people. But loyalty can be one of the strongest bonds inside of middle school if played into the right ways, shall we say. And they are seeking relationships between what is real life. They're trying to figure out how they have this type of relationship, and do I put more energy or effort into that? Do I choose this person over that person? But the relational aspect is exploding a lot more inside of those middle school years. And that goes a lot hand in hand with girls, maybe more than boys, but regardless, that seeking of community and belonging, they don't want to be the kid who's necessarily sitting alone on the regular. So those are some of the pieces about middle school specific that we kind of have thought are really important characteristics when we're thinking about what a middle schooler might be going through. And I've said this in previous presentations, but I think it's important for us to think about what are our students thinking, feeling, and doing, maybe in their day-to-day, which is a very broad conversation, but we could really talk through like what are most of our middle schoolers experiencing, thinking, feeling, and doing. And what are they thinking and feeling and doing inside of our parishes when we are executing our ministries? So when we are having our programs or gathering for other ministry opportunities, what are they thinking and feeling and doing? And I think when we put that in light of maybe what they're going through, it helps us utilize that information to really create an environment that they want to be a part of and participate in. Okay, let's talk about the characteristics of our bright high school students. The bright high school students, obviously, like I said, everyone's bright, but they are in that season where they are becoming more. They are thinking abstractly. They are mastering activities that they necessarily could not do when they're in their middle school years. They've been learning and creating those strong connections in their brain to be able to really master a skill. We start to see students who decide like they have a passion around art, or they have a passion around this activity or this sport team, and they're really pouring themselves into more hobbies that are bringing them life. There might still be a lot of instability in their emotional regulation. Obviously, there's a lot to grow into. There could be instability in my emotional regulation in seasons too. No, I'm just kidding. But the reality around, we have that sensitivity to, there's a lot of big feelings that they're having. They're walking through the expectations of maybe people are giving them similar expectations, not just the church and the values of our family, but then like, this is what I need to do at school and maybe for a job, etc. So trying to figure out how to regulate everything that is coming to them, especially in those relationships. Um, there could be a little bit of an emphasis on physical attractiveness. So this might be a different group. You might have seen these middle schoolers kind of come into ministry activities and just not really care, although it could depend on the kids, certainly. Skincare is a whole new world than it was 5 years ago, y'all. But the emphasis on that physical attractiveness is certainly elevated in those high school years. There is a sense that in these high school times, these students are starting to think about different adults who they really admire. So whether that's communicated or not, they're starting to see that whole, like, more is caught than taught. They're starting to really look at the models, which plays a lot into how are we being the best version of ourselves as disciples as we are leading these teenagers, so that they can see, not for us to be like, oh, look at us as great models, but like they are watching and admiring the ways in which we are joyful and attentive and kind and welcoming, that all of those attributes are things that they're admiring in the process. Again, that prefrontal cortex is still on its way to development, but thinking a lot about the reality that there's that risk assessment and decision making is kind of rubbing itself a little bit closer than maybe it used to in middle school years. I'm willing to take more risk, and I'm also willing to make more decisive choices than I was 5 years ago when I was in middle school. I have a little bit more sense of awareness and where I'm headed, but that risk assessment could go hand in hand with really creative ways that we would be willing to invite students to participate in activities, that they might be willing to do something new to them, that they might not have done in their middle school years. Relationship focused, Rosemary. Rosemary, that one's for you. I had a different name down, and then I was like, nope, we're gonna put my sister Rosemary in here. But the idea that, and their relationship focus, we talked about relational for middle schoolers, but relationship focused in the sense that socializing now is a lot more co-ed than it was in middle school. I don't know if you've ever walked into a middle school room with ministry, and there certainly is some interaction, but you might find yourself with a batch of girls over here and a batch of boys over here, and not as much interaction as there would be in the high school room, where it's a little bit more co-ed. So there's a preoccupation with that acceptance among peers. They have a lot more of awareness about what it means to be part of a group, to have friends, and what it means to not be part of a group. So obviously inside of the communities that we build, there will be small communities, but the sense of belonging and integrating that will be huge in how we create those environments so kids feel continuously welcomed and willing to return to our youth ministries. They have a capacity to learn more about intimate, long-term relationships. So obviously not only the ones that they are dating, but understanding a lot more about what is unconditional love versus conditional love. And that would be something that would be great to dive in with our high schoolers with even more. And obviously their empathy skills are increased during these high school years. I'm trying really hard to teach my own children empathy toward each other. And some days I'm like, I don't know how to get this through to you, what this skill is. But I was laughing because the other day, one of my oldest was like, we're just driving home and she's like, "Oh, Michael, like I saw you in the principal's office today." I was like, "Oh my gosh." I was like, "Now we have to have a conversation. And also, let's teach how we talk about empathy, about things people are going through." Oh my gosh. So, but our high schoolers are doing it well, supposedly, or better. So maybe I have some hope for my four gray children. But that idea around we can teach them how to care for another. And that might be a layer of inviting other people who don't know Jesus at the same capacity that maybe some of our teen leaders do. How do we meet them where people are? How do we help them have the skill around inviting other people in by knowing what's going on inside of their world? Independent Ike. I don't know many Ikes, but I did have one teenager named Ike, and so that really stuck with me. So, Independent Ike. I thought about how these high school students are often our friends that are forming more opinions. They have these cognitive barriers that they've developed that are reflective of where they have previously failed. And so they're starting to be able to tell themselves, I can't do this because it didn't go well. And this it's different than maybe they would have been willing to roll with it in the middle school years. So that being said, there's something to be attuned to what is challenging for them, where they think they might have failed or struggled, and how we can be super attentive and relational to continuously encourage and bring them into our community. The idea around starting to assert that independence from family as they take a step toward adulthood. This might be a way to get creative in how are we helping them learn even life skills. There's a bunch of life nights that we've created about like, how do you teach kids about money? And how do you teach kids about just various community aspects? How do you teach kids about like being a leader? How are we actually teaching them to be leaders at church and school and at home? If they're desiring this independence, helping them step into that with some skills that are faith-based, but also keeping in mind that then how we get creative with family faith formation might play a role in that. So while they might still have a really solid relationship with their parents, if they're wanting to start to make themselves feel like, yeah, I'm my own person, I'm 17, I'm 18, I'm going off to college in a minute, how are we still creating connection and opportunity for family? And being aware that this is some of the stuff that they might be experiencing as independent Ike is. And then, thinking about the idea around they do want guidance from these trusted adults. And they also want to do it sometimes at their own time. They don't necessarily want you to give them this unsolicited advice just out of the blue. The big conversation in our house is when I am frustrated, my husband's always like, do you need to be heard or helped or helped? And those are the three things. Like, do you want me to help you with this, or do you just want me to hear you out? Like, what is the response you're asking me of that too? But some of our high schoolers, while seeking their independence, may not actually be in need of getting any specific help or guidance. They might just need to be heard in that moment too. And the help may come in continuous conversations. And just that need for self-expression. We find them as they get in different communities inside of high school. Maybe they decide to change their style, whether that's their hairstyle or their clothing style or some of the activities they're involved in, but learning how to self-express as they're learning a little bit more about who they want to be. Maybe that means they're a little more chameleon and they're trying to figure out who they are based upon what these people do or these people do, but an openness to that as we watch them walk through that self-expression. And maybe in those opportunities, it would give us a chance to say, we're going to all write our own prayer. We're going to write our own unique prayer from us to the Lord. And it gives them a chance to do something that's unique to them to express what they wanted to say to the Lord. So stuff like that would be creative in connecting with that independence. Okay, stick with me. We're getting through Pride, everyone. Goal-oriented grace. The idea that sometimes, like if you are super goal oriented, I'm sure many of you are, sometimes I need to know like, well, where are we headed with this? So as you're teaching me something about maybe the faith, how is this going to affect me in the long run? How is this going to help me be the best person that I'm fighting to be? How is this going to help, like not being able to always live in the minute because I want to know how this is going to stretch me or get me to the next place. So needing to understand like the relevance in the lessons and the activities versus just being along for the ride. So I want to know the end result. Or I don't know if you've ever led a retreat and you have a teenager who's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? You're like, okay, hang tight with me. First of all, I don't know what's next. We're going to have to pivot anyway because we're never on time. No, but the idea around being attentive to that, some of them are just long-term focused, and that's how they receive new things. Um, but yet capable of making and setting goals, which could be a really great, cool motivation, whether that's intrinsically or extrinsically, but like you could really challenge those students in the best of ways. Like, I really want to challenge you in this aspect of your faith. Like, as you grow in your discipleship, here are some really cool things that you could continue to do. Like, hey, have you ever read C.S. Lewis? Let's start with that. Or have you ever thought about inviting teenagers that are in your school that don't go to church to come to this event with us? But those goal-oriented graces might be some of your greatest friends because they might be out there really motivating, encouraging, and leading their peers. Hopeful Henry, uh, I talked about like kind of that idea around hope, which is really fun actually as we talk about Jubilee year. But just the concept around there is a sense of maybe hopefulness when things are going well in their life. Like they can see they're forward thinking, they're excited. They might have some hope about religion versus maybe previously they were still trying to figure out, like I talked about the authority piece of that. And there's, sometimes there's the rub around, are you spiritual versus religious, which is what these teens are having these conversations on, which is a whole other webinar for a whole other day. But that idea around they have a little bit more hope about this true religion, that they are like, oh, okay, like I see this, I see where we're going with this. And I'm hopeful about how the resurrection will impact and change my life. So, but they might have more interest in ethics or philosophy. They might be in search of ideals. And so that would be a lot more of your apologetics conversations you get to have. You might be able to invite other students in to talk about some of more the heady aspects for those kids who are ready to jump in and go deeper in what's going on inside of all those conversations, more philosophical. And then trustworthy Teresa, we think about how they're given a lot more responsibility. So maybe this is a time where they have like more of a full-time job, and maybe they're driving, and maybe they're responsible for other aspects of school and work and life. And so just becoming that they're taking on that responsibility and building that trust across the board in a lot of ways. Not that no one was building trust previously, but there's a lot of weight sometimes to keeping the pace of all of that. That increase of responsibility plays into a role sometimes in how well they're able to commit and be present to some of the programs and the events and the ministry opportunities that we are creating for all of them. There's a lot about that, I know, like I said earlier, that can ebb and flow inside of what people are going through, what they're experiencing. But I do think that it's important for us to think about, man, there is a lot that is happening inside of their life as a middle schooler and as a high schooler too. I was talking to a recent group of friends of ours. They have a junior in high school, and they were one of many people who were sharing the amount of students who are not getting their driver's license anytime soon. And I'll be 40 this year. But like, just to give you perspective, like when I could get my driver's license, I was there. We were there that day. We were getting it done. We were going out with friends. My mom was so funny because I have a twin brother, and my mom was like, you both need to pass. And I was like, whoa, that's not my problem if he doesn't. So here's the kicker of it all. My brother got like a 99 and I got 71, which I think the lowest you can get is 70. But guess who got a car to drive that night? Not like my own car, like family car. But we couldn't wait to do it. There was some element about being with everyone and being social and having that connection. But today, you don't need to necessarily drive somewhere to see your friends. And so just even the reality around to be social for them can happen inside of their own bedroom. And yet, like, how do we help them still build solid community and be out in the world and come to events when the world kind of comes to them if they want to in that way of consumption? But there is just a whole drastic shift because of how much of a digital age it really is. And then we think too about these high schoolers and these middle schoolers and how much of the world is out there that maybe we had to really seek out to find information on, and how much of an overload of that information is currently in existence for them that we like had to really, like, you had to watch the news at 5 p.m. only to learn things, and how every hour on the hour, every minute on the minute has so much intel, and that overconsumption of this digital age is just like so much sometimes that it could be almost heavy for them. And so while tech savvy and completely in tune with like the ability for these children to be able to maneuver any sort of screen is mind-boggling for me, but also and impressive. But the reality is that they're consuming so much at such a rapid pace that maybe we weren't always designed for. And so I'm going to talk about some specific applications to ministry with all of that in mind, but I'm happy to take questions for a quick minute because it'll give me a chance to take a drink of my Alani.
I'm
Comment.
curious how much you've seen the, what have you seen change? Because you've been doing this for LifeTeen and in a parish before that for a while now. Um, I appreciate and I recognize what you just described for middle and high school. Would you say that that's been pretty consistent your whole time in ministry? Or, I mean, certainly the technology has shifted things. What would you say has been a major shift in your time doing ministry?
Yeah. So, Patrick, great question. Because I would actually compare it. So, I'll be at LifeTeen for 11 years in March. So, I'm going to compare it from my time at LifeTeen to when I did in ministry over there. And I would say that a lot of the things that a lot of the things that the middle schoolers are defined by now is what was happening with the high schoolers then for me. And so it almost feels like the more responsibility and the stress around I have to have goals and I have to get into a good college. I felt it a little bit, but it wasn't nearly as heavy, as intense as I
Mhm.
think a lot of these parish youth ministers are sharing now.
Mhm.
Just that idea around they were a little more playful, a little less stressed, a little less cranked, and had more of the like we were developing there. Now, that to be said, there have been parishes who have really shared with us that idea around during the COVID times where everything kind of paused, that developmentally some of their high schoolers were really at a pace of a middle schooler. But
Mhm.
I'm thinking many parishes have really felt like they've caught up more. But the independent piece, the goal-oriented piece, and being incredibly focused on relationships, I feel like have been big factors, especially in these last 10 years that I've been working with parishes too.
Thank you.
I think the digital age piece is just something that is just so unprecedented. And thinking about a 4-year-old who was like, I was like, turn off the TV. And she's like, I could just maneuver an Apple TV like it's no big deal. And I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, like I don't know that my 13-year-old was even able to do it that swiftly. So just the familiarity in the digital tech age, I think is one of the biggest pieces of that. I also really think like these are post 9/11 kids. Like we talk about where you were on 9/11. We've all got a story. These kids only know a world that is post 9/11.
Mhm.
And they know a world that is full of there's a shooting every month. Like they know so much tragedy that we don't necessarily I don't feel like I knew when I was that young, and what kind of hardship there was in the world, and just the amount of, I think, heaviness and economic struggles that have existed. I feel like it's just also there's such an awareness of it too, that they hear more of that inside of whether they're what their parents have lived through. Um, but it definitely feels like it's a little heavier than I were when I was with the students years ago. And I will make a note too. I mean, when I was at a parish and we talked a lot about like cell phones were a thing, but now it's like to not have a cell phone is like a bigger thing, and just like
Yeah.
the juxtaposition. I remember running a life night. Life nights are what we call our catechetical sessions. And I remember running a life night, or maybe it was an edge night, but something where it mentioned something about phones. And I did the game or I did the activity, and I remember a lot of parents were like, hey, you can't do that type of a game. Our kids don't have phones. And so just like even learning how, like, but now you could 100% put that game in there
Mhm.
because that would be such a norm. Not that everyone has a phone. I totally get that. My kid was the last one to get a phone and she got one in like middle of December. So we held out so long, y'all. I feel so proud of myself. And not that it means that I have any prize waiting for me on the other side of it, but like it's
Yeah.
just a reality of their world that like that everything is techie, everything is instant.
Mm.
It was funny to tell my children that I am I am older than Google was probably the craziest moment when they're like they think that Google has existed since Jesus. You know, like that's just the mentality, like always and
Yeah.
forever. So the tech piece and the digital age, and then I would say, Patrick, the other big change really is just the over awareness, over consumption of the heavy things inside of this world, I think have infiltrated that weren't there 20 years ago.
Thank you.
I saw a
We
question come through, but I don't get to see. I saw a pop, but I don't know. So if there was another
Yeah.
one.
In a society that is so secular, with so many things competing for these kids' attention, how can the church stake that claim on their attention? There's one.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the biggest part, and I am not super techie and like I don't really even know how to make a story on Instagram, but like at the end of the day, what I think is that I think digital evangelization has a massive place in meeting these children where they are because they'll consume it, not necessarily engage, but I do really believe that if we could be super creative, and there's plenty of fantastic organizations already out there doing that, but like if that's a place of consumption, I think that's a good place to start is to ask ourselves how effective are we sharing and evangelizing in a digital space in a world where they are. So just like
Mm.
I would have teenagers that I would meet at the coffee shop, and there's still teenagers at the coffee shop for sure, absolutely. But like, where are they? And you know, pretty much without a doubt that people are on socials, whether it's the parents or the students, depending on when. And I know middle school gets funky because they're not really supposed to have social media. And so I'm all that. But the idea around where are they that you can meet them in a place that is digital and safe, obviously. I yield to diocesan requirements, everyone, but just asking the question, how effective is our evangelization? My husband is in charge of parish council, and he told them the other day, he goes, hey, the parish Facebook page is really great, except it's literally only the live stream, the live stream, the live stream, the live stream of daily mass. And he's like, what are we doing? Like, yeah, no, not that you take that off for our homebound friends, and I watch daily mass when I don't get to go. So, but like I think that how else are you connecting with people in a world that is a go-to for them on a daily basis? And then the second big part of that is the efforts we build inside of relational ministry, which I believe is what is such an element of people want to go to a place where they feel like they belong and are willing to prioritize that. But that takes time and effort and relationship building. So I think that's the best thing about it is if we can create a space where teenagers want to go despite all of these other places coming, expecting, asking, needing of them, I think that's when we're in the right direction of building a solid ministry.
Thank you. There's another one here.
Okay.
A lot of what you described really relates to things that young people of every generation go through. What aspects of Gen Alpha do you think are totally unique in terms of their worldview, how they communicate and relate to each other compared to past generations?
I would say that the comfortability of communicating only via a device that is not answering a phone um, is real. So I think in terms of communication with each other, that is their strongest ability. That they would prefer to text than they would prefer to call. Have you ever asked a middle schooler or a high schooler how to hold a phone? If I asked you how to hold a phone, the answer is absolutely. If you ask them how to hold a phone, they kind of try to figure out what that looks like. I have. It's funny the middle schoolers and high schoolers that my kids are friends with, or that we know from parish stuff, and their comfortability of like, oh, call grandma is not call grandma, it is FaceTime grandma.
Mm.
So communication styles is completely different. Y'all, this morning I was like, hey, what do you guys want for breakfast? And someone's like, I want a mini bagel and I want a waffle, I want a sausage biscuit, whatever. I'm a hot breakfast mom. I mean, it's microwave hot breakfast, but regardless, that's my forte. And my oldest texted me that she changed her order while she was getting ready this morning. And like, I was on a meeting the other day and she's texting me, mom, 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 mom. Like their strength is in like I communicate through these devices. And I think COVID, which is a wild season to talk about, and I'm no expert, but at the end of the day, too, there's a lot of lack of that face-to-face interaction that we've heard about and that we've seen, and that has an effect on conversation. The life skill conversation piece that we hopefully can also continuously establish inside of our parish ministries. Talk about this topic, talk about the faith, have a safe space to just talk about it.
Mm.
I think that's changed a lot in the dynamic too. So I think
Yeah.
that's a big part of it is when I would immediately pick up a phone and call someone, that is certainly not their communication style too. So yes, a lot of these things are elements of development that have been experienced through many generations. But I would say the communication world is incredibly different for us now. And think about it too. We were talking about a phone chain the other day at the parish, and how do we get these kids? How do we get these kids? And guess what? These kids don't have home phones anymore. So how are we getting a hold of the kids and making that connection to invite them to Life Night? And what does that look
Mm.
like when oh, we're just going to call mom's cell phone. And mom doesn't answer a phone number she doesn't know
Mhm.
because her phone's on silent and she doesn't answer numbers she doesn't know. So just like that world is different. It's challenging in terms of communication and not all bad. It's just a complete pivot than different ways in which we maybe were able to do relational ministry and outreach in years past as well. And then I would say the second part of that is that heaviness of that overconsumption of the ugly, the bad, the hard, the tragic that is out there, that maybe had been more muted depending on what that exposure looked like. Because at the end of the day, the exposure might have had a little bit more control the younger you were, and whatever your parents kind of had set up to. And at the end of the day, now kid goes to a friend's house and it's like, oh, we'll just watch YouTube. So, and we'll just see whatever comes up on YouTube, which could be, who knows? So all that to be said, I just think the over awareness, the overexposure, the overconsumption of things might be a layer that's incredibly different than what we were exposed to in those years.
Thank you. There's another question here, but I think it relates more to ministry. So I think it'd be good. You mentioned talking about the relation application to ministry. So it might be good to do that first before we go to the next question.
Great. I look forward to that question, but we'll chat a little bit about some ways to apply what's going on with our students in how we do different ministries. So I'll talk middle school first, and this would be Life Teen is a big fan of games. And not like games all the time, every time, but like starting catechetical sessions or sessions about topics about the faith. There is something to lean into when you talk about developmentally. How can we laugh with these students? How can we play with these students? How do we give them a space where they have fun? Laughter breaks down barriers. And so we want to create a space where we play a game. And ideally, you're playing a game that involves everyone. That's a big thing for middle schoolers, like, because if you're just playing a game with 4 or 5 people, maybe they can be invested from the crowd, but ideally you're playing a game that involves movement with everyone. We are here for movement with middle schoolers. Movement is medicine for those friends. But active games are good to involve them. Something that allows them to solve a problem is always a good thing as well, or where they have to work as a team in competition with against another team. So I'm not saying necessarily like dodgeball, but like we're going to do a puzzle or we're going to do some sort of activity or game that's going to help us really work together. So we're kind of in competition and we're really invested in that. When my husband wrote this scavenger hunt, not the one we were just talking about this with the team, but this extra scavenger hunt my husband wrote for the middle schoolers at the school in the parish recently, and created this whole everything. It was a very engineered problem solving setup that they had to do, but it was timed and it was exciting. And the team of 8 of each of them would run from each group to the next to try to solve each problem so they could get all the points. So we want activity for them because it creates that sense of like, oh, this is fun. This is exciting. leading to investment for what we want to talk about in a minute. Opportunities to volunteer to be in front of the large group. You might know a middle schooler who loves to get a good laugh, who loves to be someone who tells the best story, who loves to be the one who gets a little extra attention or nudge. There might be kids inside of your youth ministry that would be a great person to volunteer because it gives them that piece, that affirmation. But it also gives them that chance to shine brightly in front of their peers. Obviously, it might be one of those things that you need to kind of maybe you ask beforehand, or you make sure that they know they're teed up for it. But great opportunity to invite them for participation. We just don't want students who come, sit, and listen to us. We want them to feel involved and invited. Big fan of talks and proclaiming and whatever the message is for the night around whatever the teaching is inside 10 minutes. And I wrote possibly prop illustrations. I'm not thinking something like the Muppets here, but I'm saying like specifically you might be able to have a cross or a Bible, or you might even be able to find a random toy or activity or book or something. And you could even invite a student to come up and hold it while you helped relate that prop, which is something that's maybe relatable to them, to the topic at hand that you're sharing about. So images really help that as well. And then I think about when I make a slide deck. So if you're giving a talk or a teaching, we don't just want to have bullet points and words on a screen. We want to have images. And so maybe you would have 4 to 5 images where they can say like, oh, I know what that is, or I relate to that. And some of it could be like, it could be something that is completely entry level. Like maybe it's something that from a recent movie or something like that, like a Minion. Everyone's talking about a Minion this year. So like, but there's something where you're like, oh, I'm able to grab their attention because I'm proposing something relatable, and then I'm going to walk them back how that can connect to the topic at hand. So I need to get their buy-in, and sometimes an image will really help with that. And then we talk about memes or quizzes that they can participate in. Again, a way that helps them feel active, participatory, and invested in something because it's relatable. It's not like you're trying to be young and cool and hip. It's like you're just trying to be authentic, but you know that these are things that are important to them and relatable in the current culture, and you can utilize that in a way that is creative and connects with them. Big fan of upbeat music that kind of mirrors that idea around, oh, this sounds a little bit like what I might hear if I'm listening to a secular radio station. So it has that style, but then obviously is full of Christian themes and Christian lyrics inside of it too. In St. Louis, we have a radio station called Joy FM. I'm sure you all have one of these everywhere, but it's our Christian radio station, and connected to it is one called Boost. And it sounds like rap music, but it's all Christian hip hop artists, which is super fun and trendy, which is kind of cool. So makes that connection, helps them find music that is kind of in their alley of like, oh, I'd listen to that, but it's talking about Jesus, which is always a win. So and then small groups, depending on how you utilize and set up your ministry programs, but having an opportunity for small group conversation. We are proponents of same grade and same gender, and a group that would stay together longer. So for example, if we're going to have this group, we're going to try to meet for a whole month, 2 months, 3 months together, so that group can really kind of grow in conversations and getting to know each other a little bit more. Less time for them to break it open. So instead of like a 40-minute small group conversation that you could do with high schoolers, you're looking for something under 20 minutes, because again, that attention span and that ability to keep them connected with you. There's more ways too in which I think small groups really can be engaging for middle school students. And I've got a whole bunch of them, but just even small stuff about do they need to hold on to something? Back in our day, we call it, a hacky sack. I have a hacky sack. I throw it to you, you share. But for students who are so used to having something in their hands, typically maybe a phone or another device, is there something comforting about holding something when they are sharing? So it's kind of connecting to what they're experiencing in their day-to-day life. And then in middle school, making sure that we're finding ways to invite and involve families. Service projects could be some of those really entry-level places where students we don't get to see all the time in ministry or even at mass might connect with us and join. And then also keeping in mind a shorter time for adoration. You're not necessarily going to do hour-long adorations with all of your middle school students, but you might do a 20-minute adoration and then a 30-minute adoration after they've gotten used to it. And you might also give them an opportunity to journal while they're in adoration, but they would need a little bit more maybe guidance in that, especially if that is something where they hadn't really ever experienced as much adoration as maybe some of your high school students, or maybe some of your students who have experienced that from just deeper times, or families who have been committed to holy hours, et cetera, et cetera. So just being aware that within 25, 30 minutes, they might be getting to that restless stage that we talked about, looking for the next thing to do. And then applying some of these things to our high school youth ministry activities. So again, like opening activities, I didn't necessarily say a game, but it's an opening activity that invites participation from them. So we don't only just want one person up front and everyone watching them, although depending on the setup of your group, that could be successful. The hope is that you are inviting everyone to participate in some opening activity that kind of gives them the chance to drop the baggage of whatever the day has brought at the door and be present to what's going on. Invite that participation. Strategically putting them on the spot. I made a comment earlier about like maybe cracking a joke with one of the middle school students, but then being aware that they might not be so ready for that, depending on what type of how they receive or what emotions they're experiencing inside of that. But the idea around there might be one of your high school kids that you could strategically put on the spot, throw a joke at them in front of the group. You know them a lot more and how they would handle that immaturely. You can include teen witnesses. Obviously, this is something we hope that youth leaders are coaching teens on how to share their witness of their faith. And sometimes that happens inside of first the safety of your youth ministry, where they have been part of this community before. Hopefully, they're out sharing their faith, maybe at their school or in other communities of their world. But the idea around we want to include teenagers sharing their faith to their peers, and that's something that we would love to grow them in over the years, invite them into, again, participation. Talks could be, closer to 15 minutes. Obviously, they have more of an attention span. And some of these students are, sitting in school and doing longer classes depending on block schedules and stuff like that as well. But the idea around we can definitely push that 20-minute talk when we're giving them a teaching in that as well. Hopefully we're dynamic though, so they're totally invested for all 20 minutes. But including stories, and here's why I say that, because I really am a big fan of the importance, again, going back to they are looking at us as models. They're looking for adults that they admire so that they can say, like, I want to take that part of their life and see how I can live in that way, or I can value this, or I can implement this. And so including stories that are practical and relatable to them help us in that mentorship. Inclusion of longer silent prayerful periods, the concept of music and then prayer and then silence for them, giving them more of that. I am starving for silence in my world because everything is noise. It is far from quiet for them. You drive by the bus stop with all the high school students and, like the ones that aren't, and everyone's got AirPods in. Like you've got students on a break from, study hall, AirPods in. I got headphones on. It's just the reality that, and maybe in all fairness, they're sitting there with those on to drown out the world and they have silence going on. But the idea around they are consuming noise and music and constantly consuming, and it's not always quiet. So in that starvation of silence, which I would say we might be in that need as well as adults some days, but music, prayer, silence, longer silence. It's always, I think, a really good opportunity to offer them that space. I think it's important that we are also teaching them how to be still and to be silent, because that could also be an anomaly for the world that is fast-paced for them right now. I talked about like kind of social media references or neutral cultural happenings. And so, for example, there's we're not pulling things from the world that obviously aren't leading them to know Jesus better. But there are things that are happening in the world that are funny and clever and unique, and it's great to be able to like highlight that. I do remember that there was a year we took teenagers to the Steubenville Mid America Youth Conference, and at that time, there was some. I don't know what guy or meme or viral video had gone live, but it was like, ain't nobody got time for that. That was like the phrase. And so we wrote on our Steubenville shirts, like, I was going to skip Steubenville this year. And then the back wrote, ain't nobody got time for that. And again, like, it was a neutral thing. It was completely allowing them to say, like, oh, yeah, like, that's a phrase that we've been saying around our friends at our school, even at youth group. And so just connecting those small things to what might be going on in their world when we're teaching them or connecting with them. More reflective music, kind of showing them what is out there and available in terms of like worship and prayer. How can they utilize some of these apps to be able to say like, oh, I'm gonna download Hallow and I'm gonna actually do that. I'm gonna do Bible in a year with Father Mike, like whatever it is, but kind of teaching them what else is available to them and challenging them to dive into it to make that connection. Small groups, we recommend that in high school, they could be co-ed, they could be multi-grade, they could be longer. You're building that conversation skill set. How do I talk about faith in a place where I have psychological safety so that when I get to a part of my life and I am challenged in my faith, I can talk about it with confidence and conviction. And then that smaller discipleship group mentality that you're growing them alongside their peers in those discipleship conversations with extended journaling time, opportunities regularly for the sacraments, and service to just kind of connect them with like, yeah, we're teaching you all these ways so that you will continuously live out the faith when you are no longer necessarily around in our world. And the last thing I want to share, and then I'm happy to take more questions as we end our time, is my husband is he plans stuff for financial planners. Anyway, I think it's a snooze fest, but he loves it. So that's what matters. And he always loves to send me this one image. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Now you can see this infographic a little bit more, correct? Awesome.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so I say be curious because I think there's a lot to learn. And while we can't necessarily in our day to day, because I know ministry is a hamster wheel of go, 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 I know that we can't necessarily sit there and do all the research all the time. But there's different pockets in which we can continuously get little nudges of intel as to what's going on. Obviously, it goes without saying, asking our students and teens about things in their life is first and foremost. But my husband sends me this every quarter. And so essentially it is this group that does all of these surveys about where teenagers are spending money. And so every quarter he sends me a different one. And there's plenty of research out there that they're doing in other departments. And this is just because he works in the finance world. But I really thought it was kind of fun because you look here and then what it does is it tells you what their favorites are. And then it'll say stuff like, this is down from quarter two, or they spent more money at Lululemon and then they spent more money here. So I was laughing here. So Chick-fil-A remains the #1 favorite restaurant. And McDonald's moves up to #2, which I was like, what? And so it's beaten Chipotle. Anyway, this you might say this is not applicable to my kids. Like they wouldn't eat at McDonald's if you gave them $1 million. But regardless, it's just trends that I think sometimes are kind of fun to get to see. It also talked down here, Instagram made a big improvement from fall of 23 and is now the #2 favorite app with 30% of teens. TikTok remained #1, but declined. And that talks a little bit in terms of like the stocks and everything like that. But it talks about makeup and beauty brands. It talks about New Balance gained the most footwear mind share while Converse lost the most. You know, it kind of gets you think a little bit about what is their thing. What are they using? What are they playing? Roblox is in here. It talks about VR devices. So again, like this is not like, oh my gosh, you guys need, this is the research we need to do, but it's kind of fun to get a sense of what are they buying? What are they spending time with? And what would be their favorites. And then maybe it gives you a chance to even ask the teens and their parents some of these things. Like, would you choose Chick-fil-A or Chipotle or McDonald's, just to learn a little bit more about all of them too. So I also really appreciated that Raising Cane's was gaining some speed. Do you guys have Raising Cane's up there? Is it made it up
No,
to the Northeast? Oh, okay.
not yet.
I say that because I think it's terrible, but my children think it's great, and I'm really mind boggled by it. But again, this isn't me that they're surveying; it's all these young folks. So, um, that Springtide research is always a good one. Pew Research with teens and religion. Yeah, so there's just a lot that I think is really fun to get a chance to see. Obviously, I'm sure there's plenty of fabulous places you could do research if you were interested in it. But even just stuff like I always like to listen to Springtide's podcast because it's an easy thing when I'm on a drive into work or what that looks like. So sometimes it's good to get a sense of, yeah, let's learn a little bit more about where they're spending their time and how they're doing different things. And so those are some of the ways in which I like to get a sense of being curious. So that was just my encouragement for you all. I know I really did a fire hose for the last hour. It's been like a lot of information. So I'm happy to take questions. And again, if you want more of these like notes that I've taken, I'm more than delighted to send them over to you too. So we could share my email at the end of this. But yeah, Patrick, any questions that I can take?
So the question from earlier was about young people who are not encouraged to go to faith formation, and this is, I think, something we've seen as a generational difference. We went from people who felt like they were obligated or they did, it was part of the larger culture, whatever the reason might have been, to parents who um, maybe they didn't know why anymore, but they encouraged their young people to participate in the life of the church. Whereas now I think we're seeing more and more parents who are not prioritizing having their kids being engaged in the church, maybe aren't seeing the same value in it. So the question is about what can we do to change that and to help young people today, like how to be willing to engage with us. I think you gave us a lot of good information on how to understand and engage with the people who come to us, but how do we earn that right to be heard or go out and draw their attention to what we have to offer them?
Right. I think a lot of success youth ministers I'm seeing are having right now is they're finding these students on neutral ground. So they're not waiting for them to be at the parish. They're doing a 7 a.m. coffee house, sitting there, reading their Bible. Hey, I'll buy you coffee if you come by, or hey, I'll buy you a cake pop if you come by, or hey, like you usually come here and get breakfast, like I'll be there. So they're finding themselves on neutral ground, whether that is again like at these sports or activities, or they're finding them at coffee house communities. They're going to 5Ks that they know students are participating in with their families. They're literally going out 2 by 2 and just getting core members, and they're going to do things. And it's a lot of work. It's
Mhm.
so much work. It's way harder to do that than it is to just say, I'm going to put on youth group. I hope everyone shows up at 7 on Tuesday. And it has to start though with us getting out of our campus to go and invite them. I also think too, like I've heard from a lot of people like it's really awkward to invite students to come because they'll probably say no. And so I ask us to internally reconcile, are we okay with being rejected? And like that's a really hard thing in evangelization. Like what does that look like to go out and kind of know, like, I got to ask this kid to come to youth group. And guess what? They're probably going to say no, but like, I don't know. It might be the best thing you ever did. I remember I was just leaving St. Catherine's, but it was me and the youth minister was taking my spot. And they were just putting a Chick-fil-A in, first Chick-fil-A in St. Louis. And we drove to the Chick-fil-A, and the drive-through had a kid who we had seen through the parish interactions, like, you see them at some bigger stuff with their families, but we had never seen that kid at youth group. And so I'm in the passenger seat, Billy's in the driver's seat, and he's like, hey, what's your name? And he's like, hey, I'm the youth minister at St. Catherine Labouré. We would love to see you there, man. And I thought, look how bold he is. Look at him just go asking the drive-through Chick-fil-A kid. But like, really, there is something to be said about how are we out there inviting and asking teenagers we know, teenagers we don't know that well, or how much do we sit inside of our comfort zone, and what does that all look like too? So I think a lot of the parishes that we've worked with really well in the post-COVID era of not everyone comes back to church is we got to go out, and we just have to be willing to invite and ask kids to be a part of stuff that we don't know if they're going to come to or not. So that rejection and like being at peace with it and being okay with a kid saying, I don't want to do that, or that's no, whatever, like we got to be ready and we just got to be able to be bold and say it. We were talking about at our parish how many families have stopped coming to church. And so the pastor said, all right, what can I do? But I don't have like a lot on this. It was a Saturday. And we were like, hey, we would like to like just set up a booth of you with a pack of Gatorades sitting there with those middle school families and their kids. And you get to just hand out Gatorades to students as they're coming to play baseball all morning on Saturday morning. And he's like, okay, I could do that. And he's from Kenya. So he's freezing cold because it was like March. So it was like when it's still freezing on the baseball fields. So he's standing there like he's dressed as if it's snow on the ground. But regardless, standing out there and just saying, all right, I'll go out where people are. Where do people hang out? And we're just going to have those conversations. So a lot of it, I believe, is us checking ourselves in terms of, are we willing to be creative and stretch ourselves and do something we haven't done previously? And be willing to just kind of go out of our box a little bit too. And then finding who are the leaders inside of your parish that have some clout and some stretch and some leadership in their own schools and would be willing to be trained and coached and encouraged to be that peer leadership team who is out there inviting their peers to come to be a part of stuff too. So I think there's a lot of ideas, and I'm happy to also brainstorm when we have more time. We could learn like the ins and outs of your parishes, but I think we got to be okay with getting rejected, and then we'll be out there asking every teenager we see at every Panera or every Chick-fil-A, and just be like, yeah, okay, I'm the youth minister. Let's go. Come on over. So. But happy to dissect that more. Whoever had asked that question, feel free to email me. We could actually like talk through what's worked and what's been challenging in your parish. I'm happy to help too.
There's a follow-up question that relates to the parents. Now, I'm similar in age to you, and I don't know about you, but I don't really feel connected to either Gen X or millennials. That whole Oregon Trail generation thing, like I feel that.
R.I.P. Oregon Trail.
So this is more of a Gen X question. What do you do when the kids are invested or they're interested, and the parent tells them no, you can't go? Like, how do you reach those parents?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I would ask inside of that parish, where are your parent advocates? And like, who do they know and what do they know? So like, where are their parents that are bought into the mission of youth ministry, prioritizing a youth culture that know Jesus and have those encounters? And how are you utilizing those parents to help you be the invitee, the word of mouth, the conversation starter, the person that might have the clout to talk to those families that are not willing to prioritize that? And I also think there is something to be said about going back to those peer leaders and their friends. I had teens who walked themselves to church every Sunday. And so, like, they had a lot of rub against their parents, but they went. So sometimes I think it's a matter of those both and. How are we making connections with those parents? And I would say, even to the point of, there were plenty of people I called, and I was such a baby youth minister. So I didn't know what it was like to be a parent. But I got to tell you, I called parents and I was like, hey, we would love for Jessica to be here. Hey, we would love for Ethan to be here. And like, and it didn't mean that it ended well all the time, but like, okay, let's call them and ask them. Maybe there's a reason why they don't want to go to church. Maybe something's happened. Maybe they were at another parish where they had a really poor experience. Maybe they've gone through some hardship and they felt like the church didn't support in the way that they needed. And who knows what, but sometimes I want to know, like, we don't know what we don't know either. And so like we could sit back and we could try to, okay, well, they're just not coming. Or maybe we just call and we just make the invitation. And we, again, be okay with not getting a yes and not getting an excited woohoo. Like, it's easy to minister to the people who are super invested, but like, I don't know, does it matter? Maybe, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of people in this world that want to be known and seen and loved. And if we just wait for them to come to us to do that, then we're missing the mark of what it means to live the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I guess part of me would just say, I'd just call the parents again and again and again. I'd send them a note, I'd send them a letter, I'd be encouraging, I'd be prayerful, I'd be loving, be authentic. And just continuously invite and witness that we're grateful for them and that they matter. And I'd probably have a conversation with the staff at the parish a little bit about like, what is our intentional outreach to families that we don't get to see? And put it in the bulletin and send it an email doesn't count. So how are we connecting with those people? I know that this is a story that is only relatable in certain little communities, but there is a priest I know who said for the next 12 months, I'm going to carve out space every week and I'm going to go door to door to every parishioner's home. Now, he obviously had to drive to certain communities and all that stuff, but knocked on doors like politician style, y'all. Like, I'm going to knock on the door and maybe you won't answer because you all got a ring camera and you're like, I don't know who that priest is. But like, regardless, knock on the door and say, hey, I'm the youth minister. I'm just coming to say hi. We're super grateful. Leaving an invitation up here. Can't wait to see it parish. Like it's bold and it's different. But like we said about all these kids, like they live in a whole different world that we can't just call home phone numbers and ask for the phone tree to trickle down and make sure all the kids come to youth group. So sometimes it takes us just getting out of our box of and being more creative too.
I'm curious if other folks have questions. I've fed some from the chat and some of my own, and we've got a little time left if anybody has more. One question, and how does LifeTeen creates a lot of resources and provides a lot of training to for people in how to do youth ministry well. I'm curious, how does research into generational differences and how people are changing? This is a big question, but how does that play into the resources you create or the training that you provide?
Yep, great question. Actually, I was telling someone this yesterday. When we craft a lot of our content, we think about a teenager who's typically like a 16-year-old boy who maybe comes around to church but isn't invested. Family isn't really invested. It's kind of like we just show up and cross it off. And we think about that kid. And so when we start with that child and we think about how do you make the connection with him? Typically every time stuff's developed, they pick a boy name. So like a Tommy, and they're like, this is Tommy. And like, if he is our demographic, how are we creatively connecting with his family, with him, and helping him feel like he's connected to the truth of the gospel? So like a lot of it goes down to when we're crafting it, you're not thinking about the kid who was like, I can't wait to go to youth group. A freshman, here we go. I'm at the welcome party. Like, I'm so excited. Like, already has their Jesus shirts on, ready to rock and roll. And not because we don't want to minister. That's absolutely important. But we're thinking just broader, like, because the reality is that there's more Tommies out there than there are necessarily about the excited, energetic girl freshman who's been counting down the days to that. So a lot of it is considering how do you connect with that person? And our content is often written or edited in conjunction with current youth ministers all across the country. So we're looking at parishes of different sizes, interactions, who provide for us real feedback on like, yeah, I could never say that at my parish because my teens don't really understand that God is Father, And so that doesn't mean that we change the truth inside of it, but we're looking at parishes who are saying, I've tried to run this night and here's my feedback from it. We do actually take games and small group questions into parishes and put them into real life. So we know if it is something that felt like it worked really well or something that you're like, wow, that looked really good on paper, So we try to think in conjunction with what's actually happening at parishes in different cities, at different sizes, with different demographics, with different affluence, So we're trying to have a good spectrum of how that would be relatable for what's going on with them. But again, there's a team of writers that are all invested inside of that who are living and breathing Life Nights every week. So they're able to say like, yeah, that doesn't work. Like that would never work right now. So that's helpful. And then our whole catechesis team is all on core teams. So they are actually every Sunday at sessions with either middle school or as their high schoolers. So they have practical conversations with these kids and what they've learned in the process of that too. Many of our staff outside the catechesis team is also on core teams as well. So we can speak to different parishes, different experiences, different dynamics, and what has is working and isn't. And then again, like the research. So Jill Bagshaw, who's our director of catechesis and research, that's her role. So she spends time in crafting the content with the backbone of what's happening in teen culture, and how to creatively write something that is relevant, that helps kids feel like, yeah, this matters to me, and then is adaptable for what parishes might be going through in that season.
Thank you. I know there are some folks on here joining us who are familiar with LifeTeen, and there are some folks that I'm not sure if they are or not. So could you talk a little bit about what LifeTeen offers? You know, gather, proclaim, break, send, Life Night, just like the bare bones basics, just so that people have some understanding of that.
Absolutely. And yes, I've used the terminology Life Night often. That is our large group catechetical sessions that we write. Life Teen has been around for 40 years. And so we create content to support parish ministries. And we do that in a variety of ways for middle schoolers, for confirmation, for high schoolers. And all of the content that we create and provide for parishes to implement all follows the model of the Mass. So ideally, it is a large group methodology. It's not just a classroom setting with desks and feeling like your usual RE classroom, but it's set up in maybe like a hall or a gym or a room in the parish, a multi-purpose room, to create a space where teenagers of all the ages would be able to be together. And then the structure, like I said, follows the model of the Mass. So we gather. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So we do a gather, your game, your opening activity, your introduction, your prayer, your proclaim, which is your teaching. That would be what we follow for the high schools. Framework is the bishop's framework for high school catechesis, and the middle school framework follows catechism. And then the proclaim break, which is where our small group conversations happen, where they have a chance to grow in conversation and community and process what they've just learned about the teachings of the faith. And then the sending is always our sending forth, gives them a chance to pray and kind of like take to heart and how they will live out that aspect of their faith this coming week before they get back together. So we do that structure to create the familiarity, and everything that we do, we hope flows from the Eucharist. So a lot of parishes who have our life nights, they actually do it following a Mass at the parish. And so they have an opportunity to go to Mass, and then they get to go and have one of the topics about the sessions too. So we rotate through the framework. And then like write kind of a facelift or a refresh. So like if we're going to talk about Paschal Mystery, we're going to talk about all these different aspects of Paschal Mystery, but we'll get to do some repetitive topics over the course of every 5 to 10 years. And there's a lot to dive into. So yeah, there's a lot. The catechesis team is so detailed. When I'm like, I just need to know where you're headed for the next 3 years. It's like a 17-page document with every bullet point. You're like, oh, this is a lot. This is a lot about the catechism. So yeah, so that's who we are. We serve parishes globally, and my team specifically gets to help parishes feel empowered, equipped. We get to brainstorm together, talk about what's working, what's challenging, share some ideas, and help people feel that they could go and implement phenomenal sustainable youth ministry. So, and we also offer camps and conferences and all that fun stuff too. So yeah, some of our stuff coming up this summer. If you're looking for a cool mountaintop experience or a training, check out lifeteen.com and see what we could do to serve y'all and your teens this summer.
One of the things I like about what you were just describing is you talked about, the gather, proclaim, break, send. So like you're gathering people together, you're having fun with them, you're proclaiming. Like there is some sort of meaty catechetical teaching in there. You know, everyone's gathered together in the large group, but you also have break. You have that small group breakout, and then the sending forth, and then some other things we've talked about through the evening about, going out and being where young people are. It's not just in the parish, but it's bringing people to the parish, but then also sending them out. So I think it just kind of has a nice package of everything there. I'm just putting
Yeah.
my life team.
Again, it's a structure that works. Let's just take it. Big bar still. No, it's and it's good. We want to model the idea around if everything that we do should flow from the Eucharist. So including the way we structure life nights.
And besides giving people that context, we've been doing this series every month. We started with Deacon Nathan Gunn in October, talking about recruiting adults. Katie talked about core team, that in the life team world, that just means your adult volunteers. Everett Fritz talked about small groups in particular in November. Annie Grandel in December talked about relational ministry, and Katie's talked about generational differences this month. And we so much like hearing from Katie that we're going to have her back next month, um,
Yeah.
February 19th. That might I'm curious what our attendance will be like because that is February vacation break. That's a thing
Oh,
here. But we'll see, and I'm sure people will watch the recording even if we have a small crowd with us. Um,
that's fun that you all get a February vacation break. I love that. Not
yes,
for
that
my
was
kids, but
I'm not from the New England, this part of the Northeast. That's a thing up here.
teachers
Um,
deserve it. Take a
yeah.
minute. Yeah, come back. We'll chat about all sorts of large group gatherings next month, which will be fun.
Yeah, because we've been talking a lot about relational ministry and small groups in the archdiocese, but there also there are going to be times that you're going to need to or want to or should gather lots of young people together. And Katie has a lot of experience with that as well, so she will be talking about that next month. And then Amelia Cowell from Ascension in Sudbury, one of our parishes, will be talking about discussing hot button issues in March.
Cool.
So stay tuned for what's coming up. And I will ask Katie if you have any closing thoughts or words, and thank you for joining us, and then we'll wrap up for the night.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being with me and inviting me to be a part of your evening as well. I think at the end of the day, the greatest takeaway is again, teenagers, middle schoolers, they'll go through all sorts of generational things like we shared, and maybe we've went through some of those as well. We don't need to be experts in it. We don't need to know every move about it. We get to love these students wherever they are. And again, I think the way we really learn who they are and what's going on with them usually comes through conversation. And those are the best things we get to do when we are relational with those students too. So, and if it ever helps, I also think it's really cool to have like a counselor or a pediatrician kind of in your wheelhouse to just ask questions about development. So if there's someone in your parish that you're like, I would love to get them involved, but it's a pediatrician, yeah, just, keep them on speed dial. You never know when it's good to know a little bit more about them. But thank you all for having me. It's always a privilege for me to spend the time with the Archdiocese of Boston.
And speaking of that, Catholic counselors, I don't have the list at my fingertips right now, but we do have, it's not an official list or an endorsement or anything like that, but we do know Catholic counselors that are Catholic and Christian counselors, and we maintain a list of those. If anyone is looking for that sort of resource, like Katie is talking about, we can point you in some particular directions for that. All right. Thank you all very much for joining us. We'll just close with the glory be. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. All right. It was very good to spend the evening with you, Katie, and with all the rest of you. I hope this was helpful. Thank you, Bridget, for joining us, and I look forward to seeing Katie and some of you next month. Good night.